Good evening. Are we live? Yeah.
Unmute.
Audio's on. Amazing. Hello everyone at home. Hello everyone who has come to Lighthouse to this very special collaboration with RS21, who are really responsible for getting us here tonight and for putting this on. And thank you for engaging. We have a safe spaces policy in the Lighthouse. It is about taking care of each other and respecting each other. And so generally expect that if there is fuckery, I will ask you to leave unapologetically. So be nice to each other. And hopefully this is also a space where if there have been some questions that you have been thinking, really don't understand this or I need help navigating it, this is an environment where we want to sort of make room for fleshing those things out and asking those questions. And you'll also have a chance to do that afterwards if you're not comfortable doing it in front of everyone. So hopefully everyone goes home from tonight feeling a little more informed and a little more equipped to doing two very important things, which is be part of the good fight for trans liberation and protect our democracy. So we have two main acts tonight. So I'm going to be handing over to them. And then we're also going to have a little audio recording from Kit O'Sullivan. And there is a transcript for that we put on chairs. It's about 8 minutes long, which is quite long to listen to something. So feel free to have a wee look at the piece of paper. And then we'll share that as well afterwards. But unfortunately, they couldn't be here tonight. So with us tonight, we have Sara Bennett, whose pronouns are she, her. She's a member of RS21 Unite the Union and is a left-wing activist. And then Leslie Cunningham, he, him, is also a member of RS21 that is on the Unite LGBT committee and is a general troublemaker. Will you join me all in giving them both a very warm up? I'll read the restatement first. Scottish Trans, also Vic and Florence couldn't be here tonight, but they have sent us a restatement, so you're going to have to listen to my voice for another minute while I read their very eloquent words. Thank you all for coming this evening. I'm sorry that we couldn't make it, but we're really heartened to hear that there was a full house booked. It's now been several weeks since the UK government blocked the Gender Recognition Reform Bill with a Section 35 order. And while that felt like such a crushing blow at the time, the weeks since have felt like a torrent of bad news and grim tidings. At times like this, it may feel like all our hard work and hope has been for nothing. But these are exactly the times when it's so crucial that we come together to carry on the fight and, more importantly, to make sure we all get through it. The first part of that has to be making sure that we ourselves are okay. And while terms like self-care and community care can feel a bit vague and inappropriate in the face of crisis, they are absolutely crucial to ensuring that we have the strength to carry on in the face of plainly ridiculous and cruel culture wars. If you are a trans person, the movement will still survive without you doom scrolling Twitter every day and following every horrible headline. Now is the time to take time for yourself, to find community locally and online, and to allow yourself to be held by those who love you for who you are, which we all know is far more important than a piece of paper from the government. It is also a really important time to reach out for support if you need it. And so please do reach out to organizations like LGBT Health and Wellbeing or Mindline Trans, who can provide one-on-one mental health support free of charge. And we'll put their details in the chat and send this to you afterwards. If you are an ally to trans people, now is the time to turn up and stand up, to come to rallies, to check on your trans friends and support them, to have slightly uncomfortable conversations with your weird uncle when he parrots anti-trans lies that he reads in the press. While it may feel like the battle for gender recognition reform is lost, it is far from over. With 6 weeks left for the Scottish Government to challenge the block in court, it is a crucial time for us to work to ensure the next First Minister takes up this challenge, or at least leaves it on the books so that a future, more supportive UK government may repeal the block at a later date. Scottish Trans will soon have an email system that you will be able to use to implore the candidates to commit to this alongside other important pledges for our community, such as committing to banning conversion practices. So keep an eye on our Facebook and Twitter for this when it goes live. In the meantime, please contact your MSPs, MPs, local councillors, anyone in a position of power who represents you and who has a duty to listen to your voice when you tell them that the trans community needs their support. It is not very sexy, but if you have time, please respond to every consultation, send letters to newspapers, report obvious false headlines, do every little thing that you can so that the dominant voice of our community is not one of hate, but one which understands that, shockingly, we are people, just like everyone else. Improved gender recognition would undoubtedly make things easier for trans people in Scotland, but it is only one step on a long journey for better access to our rights and the right to survive and thrive in this country and around the world, the same rights that all people should have. So.
Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Great to be here, and thanks very much indeed to Lighthouse Books for so kindly hosting this event. So I'm Leslie, and back in the summer of 2019, I went to my very, very sympathetic and helpful GP, who referred me to the Gender Identity Clinic. Now, almost 4 years later, I am having my first appointment at the GIC on Monday. Great. So I will be seen by a nurse, and if the nurse decides that I'm a suitable person to be seen, I will then get appointments with the doctor. If the doctor thinks I'm worth the trouble, he will then, or she will then, or they will then, I should say, refer my case to a panel of, I believe, 3 psychiatrists who will confer amongst themselves about whether or not I am actually who I say I am, i.e. a man, not what I was assigned at birth, i.e. female. They'll never meet me, I'll never have a chance to communicate with them directly, so who knows what will happen. Now, if the GRR bill gets what it wants, if it does get through the Tories' Section 35 attack, basically all that would happen is that the process of me declaring my identity would be demedicalised. I wouldn't have to go through all this palaver, which I would say is a waste of NHS time and money as well, and it would be debureaucratised. I would basically just, after a period of reflection of 3 months, be able to make a legally binding statement saying that my gender is male. That is it. Now, it's not a case, as has been alleged in toxic media of late, that anything is going to change apart from the fact that the process is simplified, shortened, and, as I say, would save the NHS a lot of time and money. What will it not change? Well, prisons have been mentioned. It has always been the case that where a person is incarcerated, and don't get me started on the nonsenseness of that, basically every single person is assessed, and it's decided then what estate, as they call prisons, they will put in for male or female inmates. Access to women's services. Again, I believe it is the case that if you apply for access to women's refuge, the organisation running it, Scottish Women's Aid, whatever, would again look at your particular case as an individual and decide whether it would be appropriate for you to be allowed to use that service. And sports, again, the governing bodies of each sport decide and have always decided who is allowed to compete in what. So basically, a lot of the stuff that you've been reading is not just blowing very, 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 very unusual cases totally out of proportion. It's just not true. Well, I really don't think there's much else I need to say about this. I mean, the attacks in the GRR bill are just a Tory, and yet another case of the Tories using a very small minority of the population. There's no more than 1% of us identify as trans and non-binary in Britain. They're using us as a political football, and just like they're using refugees. You can't fail to notice some of the awful attacks on hotels where refugees are forced to live. It's just basically another case of trying to whip up hatred against minorities that often are not in the best position to defend themselves in order to distract attention from the cost of living crisis, ongoing Tory abuses, and, oh, don't get me started. I will stop. Thank you for your patience.
Hello, everyone. Let me just put a timer on, otherwise I might go well over my time. And give me a wave. I'll put that one in as well. Okay, great. Okay, so my name is Sara Bennett. I'm a cis woman. I'm also a bisexual woman. And the reason for mentioning that is just as in solidarity, really, because we know that not only have cis women been almost pitched against trans women in the transphobic whirlwind that has been whipped up, but also there's been attempts to separate off the LGB from the T. Having over the last few years, I think, especially since about 2017, when Theresa May first talked about introducing gender recognition reform, I started to reflect on the whole transgender issue as a cis woman, but as a bisexual woman as well. No one would really know I was bisexual. I live a very heteronormative lifestyle with my male partner and son, but it's not the whole me. And when I started to reflect on that, I started to see a lot of similarities between the way trans people are treated, and also I think particularly bisexual people. Although the spotlight is really on trans people at the moment, and really bisexual people are fairly invisible in society, I think there's commonalities the way that we get treated. Our identities are seen as suspect. We are treated as if we are playing around with identities. One comrade said to me once, if you're bisexual, you get jumped on by everybody, and not in a good way. I've been accused by some people, some lesbians, of playing around and not committing to lesbianism. And I've been accused of being a sort of object of curiosity and titillation to male partners. I think what I'm trying to say is that the whole spectrum LGBT, there is so much more progress that needs to be made. And any attempt to divide us is really going to weaken us. And it's really important, therefore, that bisexual, lesbian and gay people stand in solidarity with trans people at this moment in time. But the point that I'm here to really talk about the democracy part of this meeting, because although what we're seeing is a horrific attack on trans rights at the moment, we're also seeing an attack on the whole idea of democracy. And I will come back and define what I mean by democracy, obviously, because I do think what we have here in Scotland and in the UK generally, yeah, we defend what we've got, but it's far from what we should really be aspiring to as true democracy. But it's obviously what's happened is that it's a denial of our devolved government here in Scotland's right to act in the benefit of its own citizens with what we know is the Section 35. And Westminster is trying to override Scottish parliamentary powers. Now, a lot has changed since the passing of the GRR, the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, at the end of last December. The First Minister who brought it forward, Nicola Sturgeon, has resigned. We've seen the brutal, savage murder of a young trans woman, Brianna Gay, or Guy, I'm not quite sure, I've heard different pronunciations of her surname. But luckily, we've also seen, as a result of those two actions, the Section 35 and that brutal murder, we've seen a show of solidarity come out on the streets in Scotland, and actually vigils up and down the country for Brianna. And of course, we're in a context, aren't we, of a cost of living crisis. I think we're also in a political crisis. By that, I mean that there's really a vicious, increasingly right-wing government in Westminster and no actual real political opposition to speak of. But we do have opposition, but it mainly comes at the moment from the organised trade union movement, which is good. And we're starting to see a rise in organised working class struggle. But where that will go, we will have to see, and it will depend on to a certain amount what we do to foment that struggle. We've got war in Ukraine, which is also helping feed the cost of living crisis. And we've also, as I think Leslie's indicated, we're starting to see the far right organised on the streets again. Patriotic Alternative have been attacking not only refugees, but also drag queen reading sessions. And so let's not make any mistakes that the transgender community, as the LGBT community at large, are in the sights of the far right, and we have to be really cautious about that. Let's look at the current situation though back in Scotland. So we have, because Nicola Sturgeon has resigned, we've got a leadership election challenge. Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, 2 out of 3 of those candidates, the 2 women candidates, cis women, are actually against the GRR, publicly against it. Kate Forbes was on maternity leave at the time, but has since said, I wouldn't have supported it. Ash Reagan actually left the government because of it, and says she doesn't want to waste any more time on it. And we're also having now questions about it's not a formal coalition, but let's basically call it what was a coalition with the Green Party, who were perhaps the most vocally in favour of the GRR as well. Now, I've got problems with the SNP and the Green Party that we can all talk about, but nevertheless, I think it's just important to look at the state of affairs where we're at the moment. And I think it's looking, unfortunately, I think it's looking increasingly like the GRR might get derailed, not only from the Section 35, but increasingly, actually, I think the Scottish Government is completely capable of overturning or kicking it into long grass in and of itself. And I think we need to take an honest look at that in order that we can best organise what we're going to do about it. We heard from Vic's statement, their ideas for taking it forward, but we can talk about that ourselves as well. A quick, just to update people in case people don't know what Section 35 is, probably you've never heard of it until recently, and you wouldn't have because it's the first time it's ever been used in the whole history of the Scottish devolved Parliament, and it's really mainly only used for questions of national defence and security. Could definitely say that the passing of the GRR is not a threat to national security by any stretch of the imagination. However, there is also this other use of it, which is if a piece of legislation in one of the devolved governments comes up against or might have an adverse impact on what is national law throughout the UK, then it can be used. But there are other means for dealing with this. There's a Section 104 order, which has been used before, which is meant to deal with these issues, where you have a piece of legislation that might come up against a UK-wide piece of law and needs to resolve the discrepancies or inconsistencies. You work through it together. You don't block it. And so the Section 35 is really what I would call the nuclear option. And therefore, it hasn't been done because of this national security threat or anything like that. It's done because of opportunistic reasons, political posturing. But of course, at the same time, it's throwing ordinary people's lives under a bus, really. And that these trans people's lives are seen as completely dispensable in the current war, the culture war, but also a war between Scotland and Westminster, left and right. And what I think is starting to happen is that this whole question is now being pitched as sort of opposite positions. So you see, for example, the most obvious one in the immediate aftermath of Section 35 was progressive Scotland opposite oppressive Westminster. Democratic Scotland has voted it through. I mean, let's be clear, it took 6 years for the GRR to come and get passed through Parliament. It took 2 public consultations. People said it's been rushed through Parliament. I can't think of anything less rushed through in the history of bills in Scotland. But, you know, this is a progressive Scotland and backward Westminster. And I think there obviously is some truth to that. Let's be honest. But I do wonder about the government in Scotland. It's got lots of advisors. It probably would have been aware of the opposition from Westminster to this and what preparation did it do. There were also certainly enough oppositional voices within the SNP itself. Look at the number of amendments that went through, some from SNP MSPs themselves. So I do wonder what preparation was really being made to be able to deal with this. And as soon as the Section 35 is slapped down, you can see how that can almost play to both governments' advantages. The Westminster government can say, look at us flexing our unionist muscle, we're going to pull Scotland into line. But Nicola Sturgeon, as she has done on multiple occasions, can say, oh, look, this is what happens. Westminster just takes over. And you can use that for an independence argument, right? Because if that bill had passed in an independent Scotland, then it would be going onto the law books. I'm not saying there are any ways it could have been stopped. Of course, there's always manoeuvres and machinations, but it would have been going through. But because we have a devolved government with limited democracy and it allows for a Section 35, now it's been stalled. And so I do think, have to, and I will come back to this in a bit more detail, have to question the SNP's role leading up to this as well. So I defend the SNP for pushing it through, but I also think we need to critically look at it as well. And now the whole sort of polar opposites has come down to not only Westminster versus Scotland, but it's become in part of the independence question itself. So you're starting to hear arguments such as drop self-ID and go for self-determination, as if these are polar opposite positions, as if we have to abandon the rights of minority groups for independence. I can't think of anything less attractive in the form of a kind of independence movement that I want to be part of, but it makes no sense. So people like Ash Reagan, for example, are arguing, look, we need to drop self-ID. People are fed up with it, they're bored with it, and we need to get back to the real political issues. She means, of course, probably the economy. These are the real political issues, by the way: housing, health, education, drug deaths, that they have been failing on for many years now. So to say that we're now going to get on to talk about it is a bit rich, really. I think we should have been doing something about that since 2014 and the last referendum. But the idea that vulnerable people are not tied into the economics and all of these other issues is ridiculous. Who needs healthcare? We all need healthcare. Trans people, as you've been talking about, Leslie, look at the state of affairs for trans people getting access to the kind of healthcare that they need. So these things are not in opposition. They are part of the same struggle. And this is what I find particularly annoying as an activist and as a socialist. People argue the GRR has been going on for too long and it's a major distraction. And I would say, yes, it has been going on for too long. It should never have taken this long. It should have passed. This law exists in very many other countries and not to the detriment of other people's rights. This is just transphobia and culture wars that are being used and whipped up to divide us as well. And that's why we get this argument of the clash of women's rights against trans rights. And I would just like to say, look, let's be very, very clear. There is an overlap of cis women's rights and trans women's rights, but they are not in opposition. And the whole transphobia that is being whipped up at the moment serves no one but the right wing, in my opinion, because there are women going to sleep tonight who won't have fed themselves in order to give their kids something to eat. This transphobic wave is doing nothing. Not one woman is benefiting from that transphobic wave. There are women going home tonight or at home, unable to escape, who are facing violence from a male partner. Because of the shocking lack of funding in women's refuges, they will not be able to escape. Because of the economic crisis, they can't escape. Not one of those women is benefiting from the wave of transphobia that is being spread across the country at the moment. It is a class issue. Issues of oppression always impact the poorest most of all. And, you know, if you're trans and perhaps have a wealthy background, supportive family, you might be able to access hormones you need via the private sector. People do. But what about if you're a young working class kid on a scheme in Glasgow or Edinburgh? These are the people who are silenced. The people who are silenced are the people we never get to hear from. And it's these people that we need to keep in our sights at all times. So in trying to get to the end of this, I do find the whole issue is that we have now an SNP leadership talking about the need for independence, but actually willing to sidle up to Westminster and support the use of Section 35 over the democratic process in this country. How are we going to trust them with independence? And I know trans people who've supported independence going, well, you know what, I don't know if this is for me anymore. And I understand that. But I do think independence is a good thing. I do think bringing democracy closer to the people is always a good thing. But we have to fight for the kind of independence and democracy that we want. So just to finish up, the GRR, is it the fault for Section 35? Well, that's stopping it in its immediacy. But I think we can go back further than that to see where the problem started. You see, I think to a certain extent, I think Nicola Sturgeon does believe in the GRR, but I think it is something that she wanted to leave for her legacy because she has failed in the independence strategy. After the last referendum, really nothing was done to build on the massive grassroots movement that was built at that time. So we've had talk of IndyRef 2, but nothing to bring it into being. We've had legislative manoeuvres about asking for another IndyRef, and then it gets blocked, and then we have to go down the court again. But there's been no attempt to build a new movement for independence. It's effectively, I think, been shelved. And so the GRR was quite a safe win. It looked like most people supported it, cost very little money, and it leaves a sort of a legacy piece of legislation for Nicola Sturgeon. It's also, though, the fact that she needs something, because as I've said, the SNP's record on so many fronts of health, education, etc., as I've outlined earlier, has been a failure. And survey after survey shows that most people don't trust the SNP in these areas either. We've seen the report, Glasgow Centre for Population Health report, has just said that Scotland's in the grip of a social emergency, and early deaths among women living in poverty are worse than 20 years ago. That's under the SNP, and we have to bear that in mind. And we've also got corruption as well now, haven't we, with Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, being investigated. So we need to think about what we want, what's coming up next. My own view is that, like with all progressive steps forward in liberation struggles, have always come from below. We've never depended on the court system, on the parliamentary system. It's always come from struggle below, and I think we're going to have to struggle again. And hopefully, I know that Leslie will come back to this later, and we can talk about different ways that we can do that. But I'm going to hand back to Mary now to read a statement from Kit.
Thank you so much for that. Can I check 2 things before I hit this on? Is everyone okay? Yeah. Does anyone not have a seat and want to grab a seat? Yeah, come on in. And then can I also just check, because we can't really tell from up at the front, is the sound okay? Is it okay? Grand. So as Sarah's mentioned, I'm just going to play a recording, which is Kit's sort of account of life as a trans, non-binary person and parent to a trans kid, and giving a bit of context for how things are playing out in Portobello specifically. So I will let Kit do their thing. If you want to follow, there should be a transcript around, but here they are. And do give me a wave from the back if you struggle to hear this.
My name is Kit. My pronouns are they, them, and I live in Edinburgh with my wife, kid, and atrociously behaved cat. I moved to Edinburgh 6 years ago with my child, being with my wife. And we chose to settle in her hometown as a queer couple because it felt safer than where I'd been living. Up until this point, I've been a single parent dealing every day with the inhumanity in just about every policy of Westminster. Honestly, there is no one the media, Westminster, or the general public love better to cite than a single parent on benefits. And I can attest there's a reason, even if the constant reference has become meaningless at this point. Scotland felt like hope to me, and I'll never forget the shock of what was available to me as a parent in Scotland. When my child inevitably got head lice, the pharmacist told me all about the small prescription charge that meant I wouldn't have to pay for much of this regular run of Calpol, nip treatment, etc. that comes with raising a small human. Can't tell you the difference that would have made 6 months prior as a self-employed parent living on what was then called working tax credits to get by. Chickenpox nearly broke me, and I can still remember leaving the pharmacist in sort of stunned shock at how many earnings of mine had just plummeted overnight. And I wasn't sure what food was going to look like next week, and I had all this expensive Calpol and calamine lotion. When my child was diagnosed a few years later, and it became clear that I was supporting him more than I could work, I applied to the Scottish State for a disability allowance. I was astounded by the difference between the system and the English benefit system that I had experienced before. I was believed in my need for support. When there was something that needed clarification, someone rang me, not to interrogate me, but to simply ask for more details. This had not been my experience with benefits up until this point. Just a short while later, Scotland passed a law about coercive control that meant better protection for people like me who had experienced violence at the hands of their partner. I felt that Scotland was a safer place, that I'd made the right decision, and I was glad my child could grow up in a more socially minded culture of care and support. Except that changed a little while ago. Over the last 2 to 3 years, a shift came that left us feeling unsafe as a family. It started with obnoxious chalk markings and stickers about women's rights, aimed at spreading misinformation and paranoia in our local community. Rallies began along the main drag of our local area to spread misinformation about the gender recognition reform. And then the leafleting outside our school gates began. Bad faith debates framed as concern for our children, handed directly into the hands of families around us. The impact on our school community was immediate. In the first instance came the vocal support of those that recognised the potential hate crime and inciting hatred against a group of individuals with protected characteristics. Then came the protest of the parents who were more sympathetic to this transphobia. And we've been dealing with the fallout ever since. We now have formed a community response group to the events being scheduled in local community centres and libraries, and we work hard to have them cancelled to send a clear message that we will not tolerate the targeting of our children. Sadly, I think many think that what's happening in our local community is an anomaly rather than a growing practice of gender critics trying to split and divide us. There's something deeply cynical about the timing of an event to raise concern about trans children a week after a 16-year-old trans girl was murdered. As a parent, not only do I grieve for Brianna, a life cut far too short when she was just starting to learn who she was, but I also wept for two 15-year-olds radicalised to murder her. I keep hearing people talking about how the younger generation have got it all sorted and they're going to save us. And I can't help but wonder how they're going to do that when we can't seem to keep two 15-year-olds safe from hatred that will lead them to murder Brianna. We need to take responsibility for what is happening right now around us and not place more on the already tired and far too little shoulders of our younger generation. The trans question, air quotes, firmly in place around that lonesome phrase, has become the plastic straw of climate debate. Instead of focusing on the issues the UK faces, Westminster is all too happy to back radical groups of gender critics as the effectiveness disruption is almost total. When they picked the GRR to block in Westminster, they knew the potential for outcry and polarisation. I'm sure it makes for intriguing debates about the constitutional process and law, but I can't hear that over the deafening screams of transphobes emboldened in my local area to target kids like mine. You see, there's two spectres in the UK that can be offered up with devastating effect. The first is children like mine. They're white, middle class, and assigned female at birth. If you believe any of the misinformation spread, you'll be forgiven for worrying that my child is now on a cocktail of readily available medicine, about to have some irreversible surgery and spend their lives confused about who they truly are. In reality, they've revelled in gender nonconformity. They've changed their pronouns and they're exploring new names. It's not exactly irreversible choices. And you could even argue this is all part of a preteen journey. I've never seen him so happy. And so I'd say we're on track, but somehow my child is the perfect victim and ripe for a moral panic. The second spectre is the adult trans woman. Denying this woman's existence allows gender critics to cry out about predatory men in single-sex spaces. We have the perfect victim and then the hate figure that can be used in any debate politically right now to distract from getting any sort of work done towards building a better future. The trans misogyny aimed at trans women undoubtedly led to Brianna's death. Why should this matter to those of you who aren't raising trans children or identify as the gender you were assigned at birth? To answer this, I'm going to quote my child. 8 at the time, my child was having a hard time post-Pride with some unhelpful conversations in his classroom. He earnestly asked, everyone has names and pronouns, so why does everyone keep saying, I'm obsessed with gender? There it was. The most astute observation from a child not even in double digits yet. Somehow, in the mess of growing moral panic, we reduced one characteristic into a battlefield that only seems to be mentioned when it can be weaponized. Every person has the right to express who they are, to live their truth and go about their day-to-day lives without arduous barriers to preventing them from doing so. I can't get a passport in this country as my gender isn't legally recognized. When my friend died, she can't have the name we all know and love her by on her death certificate. Why? Because she felt that going through a lengthy process that would lead to a psychiatric diagnosis of dysphoria wasn't for her. If my child wants to pursue a gender-affirming care, We will have a lengthy process with little independence at the time when he'll be exploring his own autonomy. He will have to rely entirely on my consent. As someone who grew up soaked in my parents' homophobia, I can't help but think of a child that doesn't have a parent like me behind them. This doesn't feel like the Scotland I moved for, and I'm losing hope. When I fight for my kids' right just to be anonymously included in school rather than conspicuous in his identity, know that I'm fighting for yours too. I don't want to see sports teams tracking periods to check who gets to compete, because I think the sum total of that would be zero for all. I don't want to see gender critics continue to distract urgent rape support services anymore. I want to see a strong leadership in the country I chose as a refuge that recognises that we are at a moment in time we've been at before with Section 28 and the right to equal marriage. These are the same words, the same strategies, and the same hysterics, that Westminster is so cynically using them when the true impact of a Conservative government has been revealed is galling. It's time to put some of these things to bed and move on, because this is distracting us and there's better shit to do. This is a small change this is a small change in a form that doesn't even go far enough. Letting this be pushed back would be devastating for my community, but I worry just as much for the precedent that's being set for Scottish politics when there is simply too much that needs addressing. Let's get it done.
I'm going to ask Graham, when you have a chance, if you want to turn on questions online, if you're watching from home and you have questions, if you lot want to put your thinking caps on for any questions that you want to throw this way, and I'm going to hand them back to you, and you two have.
Right, I'll not be long. Yeah, one thing I forgot to mention about what the Gender Recognition Reform Bill would and wouldn't change was the very important fact that the age limit for self-ID would be lowered from 18 to 16. And just to briefly respond to some of the ridiculous stuff that's been said about the supposed dangers of allowing 16-year-olds to say who they really are without having to spend more, and they'd have to wait 6 months reflection rather than 3 months for over 18s. Well, in Scotland, you can vote when you're 16, you can get married when you're 16. I'd say they're both pretty important things to do. So really, what's the problem? Anyway, where do we go from here? Just a wee bit more of my personal history. I'm cautiously optimistic that there's actually a lot of support for trans and non-binary people. When I actually came out at my work in the summer of 2019, and by the way, I wasn't working for one of the kind of rainbow Google or Sky companies, it was actually in the bus tours, which is part of Lothian buses. So a lot of my colleagues were not just guides, as I was, but bus drivers. And the only people that said anything whatsoever after I outed myself through an email that went out to absolutely everybody as a gay trans man, the only people who said anything were 1,000% positive. Not a single nasty comment, not even a single funny look. Everybody was wonderful. And some people actually came up and slapped me in the back and told me they were proud of me, for goodness sake. It was really nice of them. Anyway, I think that there are things we can do in terms of drawing support for this. I mean, obviously, if you're in a trade union, you could ask for a member of, well, in my case, I'm in the Unite LGBT Plus committee. If you're in Unite, you could ask for one of the committee to come and speak. Most other trade unions have equality setups, similar LGBT committees. Obviously, not everybody's in a workplace or a unionised workplace. So again, if you're involved in anything, you know, I mean, any sort of community group, any sort of social club that you think people might like to discuss this a bit, I mean, just ask me, ask Sara, ask the Lighthouse Bookshop to find somebody. I'm sure you wouldn't mind. We'd be delighted. And the other thing as well, I mean, the STUC, to their credit, has been doing a bit of lobbying over the Section 25 thing in defence of the GRR bill, but it's been very behind the scenes. I suspect very much your average trade union member doesn't know about this. So that's one thing. Another thing that I'm very encouraged by is the fact that so many young people, and they certainly shouldn't have to do all the work that people my age have not done in the past, they're ashamed. When you go on a Fridays for Future march, what do you hear? One struggle, one fight, climate justice, workers' rights. One struggle, one fight, climate justice, trans rights. Good for them. But they shouldn't have to do all the work. And the thing is, as well, we've got a number of events coming up. 31st of March, it's the Transgender Day of Remembrance. That's mainly marked by quite solemn vigils and things like this. But again, we get the word out to get people to maybe light a candle or something. And in a more sort of vocal way, I don't think the date's been set yet for Scottish Trans Pride. It's got to be sometime in June. I think the organisers will confirm that quite soon. What I think would be absolutely wonderful, and again, I'd like to link this for the kind of independent Scotland that we want. I would love that to be the biggest trans pride ever, march ever. I'd like to see community groups like the Live in Rent coming along. I'm pretty sure they will be anyway, they're wonderful. I would like to see trade union banners, loads of trade union flags. I would like to see everybody along on that march, or at the very least out in the streets clapping and cheering and giving us their solidarity. I'm really, really optimistic that we could get something like that happening. And if you would like to try to work towards that, we will be having a sign-up sheet going around later on, just to be kept in touch. Promise not to bombard you with emails. And also, if people are interested, maybe we could organise a bigger meeting. We certainly couldn't hope for a better venue, but maybe something, no, maybe not quite as good, but bigger. And so we could fit even more folk in. Anyway, thank you so much. Wonderful to speak with you, and thank you for coming.
Does anyone have a question? Or would anyone, I don't usually say or a comment, but does someone have a contribution or a question that you might want to throw in? Anyone who wants a question? I'm shy on mine as well. Got one question. I am. Oh, not that talented. I am a pretty recent immigrant. Yeah, I moved UK 2 years ago from Australia, and what I found really galling at the time was how it seemed to be really like acceptable or permissible or possible to be a like left-leaning feminist and still be transphobic, and that was just in all the what I would say left-leaning press. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on why the UK seems to be such a fertile ground for that, other than the fucked Tories. And also the side comment that it's trickling into Australia at a really devastating and fast rate.
It's a very good question, and one that comes up repeatedly, because I do think, compared to many other countries, the United Kingdom is seen as a bit of a special case in this arena. Having said that, let's not forget that we have the far right in government in Italy, the far right in Hungary. We've had the far right in Brazil and Trump. So there's plenty of countries around where transphobia is unfortunately alive and kicking. But I suppose here we don't have a far right government, but we do have a government that's going ever further rightward and is quite keen to whip up the culture wars. When it comes to the left, this is something I go back to a lot. I think you can go back to second wave feminism though, and if you think about the key countries that were involved in that, and it was the United States, Britain and France. And I think a lot of the difficulties that we are experiencing today with the feminist left have actually been there for a long time. And despite the very real gains that were made in that second wave in the late 60s into the 70s, around abortion rights, contraception and equal pay even, there were a lot of divisions around what kind of feminism is this and who is actually really represented, and is it a majority of white women, maybe mainly from a certain professional, educated, middle-class background, and that they didn't make room for many other women. And I think that has sort of fed through, if you like, even up to today, because despite the gains, we haven't seen female liberation, we haven't seen gender liberation, and what we have seen is the encroachment of a neoliberal project where the marketisation of everything has crept into our lives. And I think that's taken its toll in that what was once a struggle for, and which should have been a unifying struggle, is now a competition over rights. And people think, and I do think a lot of the feminists left from that period, part of their identity is that struggle. And they don't want to cede ground to other people. No, this is my struggle. This is my identity that I had to fight for. And I think it's partly a reflection of the failures of that time as much as anything. That's possibly not correct. That's just part of the interpretation from my perspective. But if anyone else has got a view on that, that would be really interesting to hear. Or Leslie, if you've got any view, or Mary.
I think there are two things I would add just from reflections of what I've seen in the left-wing feminist scene through the bookshop. One of which is that it serves the far right and it serves homophobes and anti-queer movement to elevate women who are seen as credible on the left to be the front for a lot of their queerphobia and a lot of their misogyny. And so I think that there are women who genuinely feel and have been told and feel connected to a feminist struggle who have not looked carefully at who is funding and encouraging the movements that they're involved in. And a really clear example was the attack on the Gillick competence in the UK, which for anyone who knows is our legal mechanism which allows someone under the age of 18 to decide that they are able to make the decision to have an abortion. And that we have understood in our legal system that it is possible for someone who is not 18, who is not an adult, to understand the repercussions of a medical decision that is necessary for them. That was a real win for feminism. It was a real win for reproductive justice. That same law is the one that they are trying to undermine through the courts by pointing at exactly the kind of child that Kit has, and saying, look, actually, they're mutilating these children and they're making, we need to protect the children from making these decisions. But who's funding that legal mechanism and who does it hurt in the long run? That was a chipping away at abortion rights. And when you follow the money trail, a lot of it goes back to evangelical groups in the US. A lot of it goes back that way. So I think partly there are women who have ended up just being a front without knowing that that's what has elevated them to being able to have the platforms that they have, or being, sort of, once you're writing in the Daily Mail and the Times, you got to really question, you would think, like, why you've come so far on everything else that you believe. So I think that would be one thing I think has ended up happening. Leslie, did you want to add something on that one? Jean, go for it.
So I do a little bit of research on the media representations of trans women. So as you can imagine, I have a lot of fun with that. And one thing I've noticed through researching the British media is just how elitist it is, how establishmentarian it is. Various very good journalists like Nesreen Malik, Owen Jones, Ash Stark and the Novara media team, they really highlight statistics like 55% of our columnists went to either Oxford or Cambridge across the UK media, which is an incredible statistic because it's something like 1% of British people go to Oxbridge, but 55% get to write the columns which influence the news stories. So whether they're liberal left, like Hadley Freeman, Sonia Soda, or further right, they generally come from the same kind of education system, same kind of privilege system, protecting what they've got, and also not really understanding minority rights. They write about things that they don't have specialist knowledge in. If you're going to write about minority rights, you think you would consult with Stonewall, etc. But instead you get a huge gap between analysis and knowledge in this 55% of columnists who went to Oxbridge and really have very little connection with these minorities. So you get these experts who actually don't know very much, who are very establishmentarian, they want to protect the institutions, they can get scared in moral panics very easily because they don't really know much about trans people. And so we've got a lot of ignorance and a lot of confidence simultaneously in these journalists. So I think the problem is structural, and it's not just trans people, it's minorities generally really suffer from our media, because these are very privileged people who frankly are very cut off from the rest of British society, but they have a lot of influence. The other thing about left of centre women who are gender crits, this is just a personal observation, because I'm kind of the same age as them now. It's like the leadership of the gender crit organizations. It's weird. I look at the date of birth and I have almost the same date of birth of every gender crit leader, because I grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the era when the Murdoch press started to influence Britain. It was a horrifically homophobic, racist, misogynistic, transphobic country. The transphobia went on for decades in the media. I internalized that. I had so much self-loathing. I didn't come out for decades. I didn't come out till recently, because you just had such a disgusted view of trans people. And so I kind of understand the loathing that they feel towards trans people, because I used to have that myself. And so I think it's growing up in the 70s and 80s. These people are now in charge of these institutions. They've grown up, again, with this very toxic media that created such horrible representations that I think a lot of it is internalized. So I do think there's something in that as well. So again, I blame the media in terms of influencing discourse. And just to close on that, in 2012, there was the Levison inquiry. It was ostensibly about phone tapping, but they also did an inquiry about the representation of minorities and said the British media generally has a huge problem in representing marginalized groups. And nothing was done. It was 2012, it was the Cameron government. They buried it because the Conservatives have such a very intimate relationship. But until we do something structurally in terms of reforming our legacy media, especially the press, it's going to continue to be bad. So what we need is a reformist, progressive government to really address our media.
Thank you, Tina. Is there anyone else who has a question in the room? Or a comment? Oh, there's one at the back. I might not reach you with the microphone, so if you want to either come up and speak into it, or yeah. Thank you.
Just a very quick comment and observation that there's been excellent discussion of the GRR coming up, but what we haven't talked about yet is the fact that voter ID was introduced recently and will apply for the next May elections. And I think that this is an issue that we as a community need to be thinking about quite proactively when it comes to democratic participation, because it is well established that voter ID laws affect the most marginalised groups. And there are an awful lot of reasons why trans people in particular might struggle with this issue. So I would just like to add that as one of the things that we should be thinking about within this conversation.
I think everyone online is quite shy too. If we don't have any burning questions that anyone feels comfortable sharing here, then
It'd be really interesting to know. You've heard what our views are, but I think we've got a fight on our hands, guys. Let's be honest about this. Nothing has ever been ceded out of generosity. And we're facing a period, we have been now, as I've mentioned in what I started off with, the cost of living crisis. This isn't going to go away anytime soon. And I believe it's obviously as well impacted by a political crisis. Don't have proper representation. So we're going to have to take matters more into our own hands. And the one thing that we've got on our side is some fantastic lessons from history. Someone mentioned Section 28 earlier, and the ACT UP organisation around that. And before that, when I was growing up, I also grew up in the same period as yourself. I'm a 1970 girl. Is that one of the things that really turned me on towards politics was the miners' strike, because my family all come from South Wales. You wouldn't know it from my accent. I can put on a Welsh accent if that helps. But I'm actually born in London. No. So this, my parents were directly involved in solidarity work with that. It was the community that I used to go back and visit every summer was being devastated. It had a huge impact on me and turned me into a socialist, as well as the famine in Ethiopia when I suddenly realised the world was going to shit. But what happened around there was it was also when Thatcher was attacking LGBT people. And we had the gays and lesbians support the miners as a result. And that was the intervention of a socialist, communist, I think, but a socialist who understood that the government, the Tory government then under Thatcher, hated the miners and wanted to smash them, completely decimate them. Also hated gay people, lesbian people, LGBT people. And they saw that this meant, we have to come together. Whatever you might think of us, you need us. And we need you. And so we have to stand together. And it was a brilliant movement that came together. And I think, can we resurrect something like that? Can we learn from those lessons? Because we have strikes going on at the moment. I've seen trans people turning up at those picket lines. And I think that's what we need to do. And I think we can be inventive and creative and build new ways of solidarity that help overcome the divisions. But I'd really like to hear from you. Have you got any ideas about how we can take this struggle forward?
Does anyone want to signpost anything that you're involved in or something like that? Or yeah, go for it.
Hi. I think sometimes for me anyway, I've lived in Scotland 3 years. I think it can be hard to find the group because I feel like maybe there is one, but I just haven't aware of it. But I don't know of a space where I can go to talk with people about this. So maybe that could be. And another thing just to point out is I know that myself as a trans person, my activism is leaving the house every day. And that can be exhausting in itself. So sometimes we do need the help from the rest of the LGBT community in these matters.
Yeah, just in that, I mean, I think it was mentioned the statement you read out from Scottish Trans Alliance. I also work as a volunteer for LGBT Health, and they provide really good support, and it's all free. And basically, if you live in Edinburgh, Glasgow, I think if you live in Scotland, well, certainly you can get online counselling wherever you are in Scotland. If you want actual in-person stuff, I think it's Edinburgh, Glasgow. So I really would suggest that, you think about them. And also, sorry, but I mean, if you want an environment where you can be out and proud and whatever identity you are, RS21, I think we have got some Trans Liberation House stickers. I'm very happy to hand out later. Sorry about the plug, but could I just also say that the person who referred the importance of the voter ID, the photo ID thing, I couldn't agree more. This is something that I've got a beer in my bottom to be as well. Many please personally remember this. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. Yeah, I would say, it is shameless. RS21, honestly, is one of those spaces that exists at those intersections of feminist organising, socialist organising, LGBT organising. Anyone who has been on a picket line in the last year has seen Leslie fly the Union flag with the LGBT flag, with the green flags, and inviting everyone in. Graham, and there is something really galvanizing in those moments of seeing the climate movement, of seeing tenants unions, of seeing the union and so if you're going to a picket line, don't go shy to wear your pride flags, because those have been spaces that are increasingly LGBT inclusive, and very much the more we're seen, the better. I would flag, so there's the RS21 mailing list. There were 2 groups on Facebook. I'm showing my age. Facebook is still cool for some of us. Penguins Against Hate, and there was an Edinburgh Trans Solidarity Anti-Sticker group that was started mainly just as a way of collaborating to find the spots that had transphobic stickers on lampposts and around schools and all the rest of it, to cover them up with some trans solidarity stickers. Those groups also organise in general if there are, if any of us spot a transphobic event, if any of us spot any kind of banners flying at schools, anything like that, people put that into the group so that we can know where it's happening and coordinate some kind of action. So it's a little accidentally anarchist, like there's no top down, there's no one organizing it, there's no one funding it. But everyone chips in, and it's people all over Edinburgh and also in Glasgow, and they do a really good job at just being like, hey, this is happening. Or if you spot it, you know that you don't have the spoons to address it, to be like, I've seen this, putting it out there in case someone else can show up. So if anyone thinks those groups might be of interest, if you let me know your names on the way out, and then I can add you on Facebook, and then invite you into those groups. You put your hand up. Did you want to add to that?
Oh, okay, I'm gonna move. No, I just wanted to flag something that's going on at the moment at the University of Edinburgh. Probably, maybe people have heard, but basically there was a screening of a transphobic film which was meant to happen about 2 months ago, I think, which was blocked by activists. And right now, 2 people have been really targeted by the university, and they're facing sanctions, like true sanctions. And the group which is putting up the screening, calling themselves the Academics for Academic Freedom, are gender critical, like unshamedly, like it's on their web, like it's on the university page. You can see that like there should be debate about gender and like so. And anyway, they're trying to put up a new screening of that same film, whilst at the same time the people who have been identified and targeted are facing that hardship. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen on that front, but just to like put it out there, this is going on with the University of Edinburgh right now. Yeah.
Saying that the principal's allowing the screening to take place. Do you want to jump into more? Is there anything that we can do to interact? Oh, and there is another question at the back. I can't come all the way to you, so if you fancy coming down to the front, or if you want to follow.
This is more subtle bribery for the next screening. I'm going to bake biscuits for the attendees whenever that happens. We still don't know when, but it will. I will bring biscuits.
Yeah, go.
There's something about the documentary as well, because it's called Adult Human Female, and I think the response from the Vice Chancellor, Peter Madison, was because UCU tried to stop it from happening because they're very trans inclusive, and the response was, you should watch it, you should engage with it. So I tried watching it. It's like a 90-minute film, and I had to give up after 60 minutes. It's basically trans women are sexual fetishists. Trans women are violent, trans women are delusional. And I mean, you can't engage with that. It was so demoralizing. And all I felt was self-disgust and felt totally low. And I had to stop after 60 minutes. This wasn't a documentary. This was hate propaganda. Fear-mongering against trans women with all the worst caricatures, without data, without any patterns of data to kind of support anything, just talking heads saying one fear-mongering things after another. And it's like, how do you respond to that? That's not a debate, that's just hate. So it really doesn't bring any value. I think it really should be banned because of the reasons I've given. So yeah, it's a horrible documentary. I just wanted to say that.
Vocally hating, basically, you know, not changing behavior. Like,
did everyone oh.
Thanks.
Yes, my name's Grant Burrows. I'm an activist with Gina in the UCU branch at University of Edinburgh. So this film came on our radar. I think it was a week or so before it was due to be screened, and it was an amazing mobilisation of staff and students, and absolute respect for those who got themselves into the room where it was getting screened and caused it to be stopped, not once but twice, because University had a second venue that they scuttled off to, and the students and others got there first. But yeah, it's really important that we stop this being screened the second time, because the university is holding a slightly firmer line with the so-called academics for academic freedom, but they won't hold the line for long. Because we know that institutional power is what these people actually wield. They'll wrap the principle around their little finger and get this thing advertised again for screening. So it's really important that we do mobilise again every time this happens. On the subject of mobilisation, that's what I put my hand up to say earlier. There's going to be something really, really big happening on the 15th of March. UCU is out on strike. PCS is out on strike. RMT are calling out a big rally in Edinburgh, and up and down the length and breadth of the country. This is going to be a huge strike day. It's UK Budget Day, and this is really a chance for everybody to be on the streets together, sending a message to this rotten Tory government about all the shit that they're piling on us. Everyone, as others have said, is one fight, and we fight this back together. Thanks.
Is there anyone else I'm not seeing? No? Anyone else with a final question? Do you two have a final?
I'll just come back very quickly, and thanks everybody for the discussion. And yeah, I mean, Les has described himself as a troublemaker. I'm a bit of a rabble rouser. And whilst we're here to have a conversation with you, I also want to get involved politically with you. We can't do it on ourselves. We're not the clever people up here talking and informing you. We learn from you. This is a joint struggle. And so seriously, if anyone thinks, you know what, I'm sick of this, I want to do something about it, and I completely get why trans people must find it hard lifting their head off the pillow some morning because of the transphobia is horrendous, right? I get it. But I think by coming together, we can make ourselves collectively feel better and feel some of our strengths. And, you know, we've got a date there, the 15th. Maybe we can all get together and go down around some picket lines with the trans flags and the Unite flags and start to think about how we build a movement. In terms of that film, let me just say, look, I'm not in favour of shutting down debate, of cancelling programmes at all. But I do draw a line. And I think this is what we have to be clear about, because I think we can have lots of interesting discussion about gender and its relationship with our bodies. There's loads of things to talk about. I'm fascinated by that subject. And there's probably lots of different views in this room, but we could all agree that we defend trans rights and we defend women's rights, etc., etc. But this film, like Gina, I tried watching it because I thought sometimes you just got to know what the enemy is saying. It's on YouTube, for God's sake. It's not cancelled. It's not silenced. It's there for everyone to see. So I thought I'd better watch it. And I got to 20 minutes and had to turn it off. And I'm not trans, but I found it so offensive. I thought, no, I better watch it again. I got about another 10 minutes. And I just said, this is hate speech. If it was a programme that was trying Muslims as terrorists and a danger, and was demanding that Muslim women be unveiled forcibly, I would say that was hate speech. If it was a programme that said that disabled people are somehow invalid and need to be marginalised or whatever, I would say that's hate speech bordering on a far right, agenda. And I think that's why we know that this aligns with the far right, neo-Nazi right. So I would draw a line there and say I'm all in favour of free speech, but I'm not going to be in favour of hate speech. And I think everybody's got a right to protest at it. And if we shut it down, we shut it down. It's not as if it's gone away. We've got a lot of work to do. But yeah, I've talked enough. So final word to you, maybe, Leslie.
Well, I can't really follow that, especially anything very much. But totally agree with what Sarah said. I would just want to again thank you all for a really, really excellent discussion. I've learned an awful lot from you. Thank you. And just to kind of finish on a hopefully not too over optimistic note, I mean, getting back to what I said about getting a really good reception when I came out of my work from my colleagues, I don't think that the majority of people, certainly not working class people, are transphobic or believe any of this stuff. They're either not bothered in the best possible way and that they just want to get on with their lives and they'll let us get on with our lives too, or they are actually supportive. I think it was Peaches here said, couldn't remember exactly where he got the statistic from, but when there was a survey done about what people thought about the GRA reforms, as it was then, I think it was 76% of working class women were totally in favour. I've never had a bad response turning up at a picket line with a giant pride flag or trans liberation now sticker on my front, which you can see. And then I'd just like to make a wee point, by the way, when married to the Union flag, it wasn't actually a butcher's apron that was carried, it was a Unite the Union flag. Just in case. But I'll just end by saying I had the privilege of speaking in support of a motion at the SCAC LGBT conference. That's my goodness, if I got there. I was a delegate, I didn't get crashed, but anyway. I spoke in favour of getting the GRA reforms done, and at the end of my spiel, I said that, well, it was passed unanimously, I'm about to say, so it's STC policy. At the end of my spiel, I said, look, the most decent people, the majority of folk are on our side regarding the GRA reforms. The only people that oppose it are a small minority of bampots and idiots. I rest my case.
I think that's us. That's a great note. Do feel free to sort of stay, mingle, ask questions, meet each other. If you want to have any of those resources signposted, or you want to sign up for anything or ask a follow-up, then we're around, and we're not closing anytime soon. So enjoy the bookshop. Everyone online, thank you very. Oh, Graham. Oh, there it is. Thanks for coming out on this cold night for both these big issues. Thank you and good night.
Sorry, can I just say some of us will probably be going to the pub afterwards and pub locally. So if anybody's interested in a wee bevy, just let us know. Probably just across the road. There's the beer tree, there's 32 below, but beer tree's quite big, so.